Welcome to the Jboy Show, hosted by Jake Crain, the fastest growing sports show in the nation.
I'm Coach Hugh Freeze.
This is Super Bowl champion Brandon Graham.
Hey, this is DJ Shockley, and you're watching.
And thanks for watching the Jboy Show.
What's up, everybody? Thanks for hopping in again. Got another great one coming out of the oven. Going to talk some SEC, maybe a little NFL. Going to dip into Florida a little bit, talk about the Gators with one of the greatest to play there. Going to get to him in 1 second. But first, let me give a shout out to my partners at betonline.ag. Head over there today, whether it's racing, any sport, Major League Baseball, NBA, WNBA, they've got all of it. They're going to play the sharps, whether it's parlays, props, teasers, pleasers, whatever. Head over to betonline.ag today and tell them that Jboy sent you. They got some great stuff going on over there. But very excited to bring on two-time Super Bowl, NBA champion, SEC champion, first team all SEC offensive lineman, Max Starks. He's now a college football and NFL analyst for Sirius XM Radio. A guy that's been through the wars, understands it, and I'm really excited to get down and break down some SEC football with him today. And Max, man, I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, man, I'm looking forward to it, Jake. It's always cool. You get to talk some ball on a random day of the week. It's always cool.
No doubt. And you know, man, SEC football, it's 365, 24/7. It never sleeps. And, that's where I want to start, Max. And we can start with Florida because, I find the dynamic at Florida so interesting. We always know they're going to have talent. The state is talent rich. They're able to recruit on a national level. Won the SEC East last year, played Bama pretty tough in the SEC championship game, and lost a lot, Max. You look at Kyle Trask, you lose Kadarius Toney, you lose Kyle Pitts. You kind of go up and down that roster. The defense didn't play very well. How do you look at Florida coming into this season with Emory Jones at quarterback? Kind of what are your expectations?
Well, I think this is where we kind of take the regression. I think this year, as we try and rebuild and retool, we don't have the luxury of Alabama, right? I mean, Alabama seems to just grow a five-star quarterback, that's been sitting on the bench, seems like every single year. You're like, oh, there's another five-star.
There
I
he
almost
is.
forgot about him. 2 years ago. That's right. He signed. And I think that's where we're at because, you didn't really know what you had. This Dan Mullen's trying to bring in talent, trying to evaluate what talent he had there. You had Felipe Franks, who wasn't one of his picks, right? That was a McElwain pick. And you had Luke Del Rio that was there, but then Luke takes that bad hit. He's a transfer guy. And then Kyle Trask just sitting there in the wings.
Yeah.
You know what the potential looks like, but he gets injured 2 years ago when he's trying to go for the starting job. And then, 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 years ago, Felipe Franks gets injured. He takes over the job. And he becomes this guy that we didn't expect because he's been a career backup, right? From high school into college up to that point, we've always looked like he's just a fill guy. And then he takes the main stage. He gets the full reins last season. And that kind of puts Emory Jones back in the discussion category where, okay, he's now your change-up guy. He's your gimmick guy. So where do we go from here? Well, Emory Jones has been there long enough. He knows this offense. Dan Mullen has had a great relationship with him. And so now you're going to see his shot. But you lose a lot of weapons. You listed it. Kadarius Toney being gone. Also Trevon Grimes being gone from that wide receiving core. And then you take Kyle Pitts. You also take Stone Forsythe, your left tackle.
Mm-hmm.
He's now in the NFL. Brent Hagee is gone as well. So offense has to do some growing and some shifting for this upcoming year. I think they can still be competitive. But when you look at what Georgia has, and JT Daniels, we saw everybody else on that roster, right? Stetson Bennett, we saw DeJuan Mathis. In fact, Jamie Newman didn't even want to compete because he felt inadequate. So looking at that, you say Georgia's the clear advantage in the East right now because they have the quarterback figured out. And that's what the SEC is now, where you start with your quarterback and you work your way down the pyramid. And so you have that now. Granted, we'll see what happens with George Pickens. His injury, obviously, Jermaine Burton can come in and step and be a wide receiver one. We'll see if he can hold that full-time duty. But you got a big offensive line. You got a stable backfield. And your defense is still good. So Georgia gets the rung. And that's why I think Florida kind of falls right below them. Yeah. Unless they get some maturity up until that day we meet, post Halloween, that's where I'm going to have to put it, is that Florida's the second best team in the East. And then we're going to see also what Kentucky can do.
Yeah.
Can they build upon themselves? Can Vanderbilt with Clark Lee, what is he going to pull out of the woodworks to get Vandy somewhere reliable? South Carolina, Shane Beamer, see what those boys can do when you're bringing in this type of offense and you're really changing it up. So I really like where the SEC is, especially in the East. I think it's going to be more compelling, but Georgia, I think, is the class of the East right now. And that pains me to admit that Georgia is better than Florida right now, but I think that's where we stand.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I want to get you on here, Max, is you're going to say what you think, not just what you think the fans want to hear. And that's what our audience wants to hear. They want to know the truth and what a guy with your pedigree, really thinks. And I do want to stay with Florida just for one more second before we kind of transition through, because, and you kind of alluded to it. Florida's personnel is different. And really, in my opinion, Kyle Trask was kind of the anomaly for Dan Mullen and the system that he runs. Because, you look at the Dak Prescotts, you go down the list of the guys that Dan Mullen typically has, guys that can run a little bit and how that kind of formulates into the game plan and a little bit of the RPO stuff and move in the pocket. I'm wondering and listen, Dan Mullen has his shortcomings, but I think he's one of the best play callers in the country. And I think he's one of the best at adjusting to his personnel and not being too stubborn to adjust to his personnel. Now, the question is that personnel as talented as what just left? I don't think so. That's why I agree with you. I actually have Kentucky, as crazy as it sounds, Max, finishing second in the East. And I don't think that's too far-fetched. But, when you look at Florida defensively, Max, last year, the biggest story out of Florida wasn't that the offense was just so explosive, this, that, and the other was how bad the defense was and how, the expectations with Todd Grantham. And I look at that side of the ball this year, and if they're able to take some steps there, that'll obviously stem any of the changes early and kind of balance things out, feeling your way out on offense. But how surprised were you by the struggles on defense last year with the personnel that they had? And do you see that getting better this year in a year where it has to with Todd Grantham? Because we know that relationship with him and Dan Mullen isn't exactly a Romeo and Juliet scenario.
Well, I think it has to get better. It doesn't help that you also lost Marco Wilson, probably one of your better DBs of the two, and he had his own share of woes.
Yeah,
but
the cobbler.
The one thing that what made it really tough was that we're so used to the secondary being really strong, right? I mean, we put out draft picks year after year from that secondary, and the problem was kind of like LSU, right? You didn't really have that many great guys you could depend on because they just kind of got decimated over the years and you never really replenished that well. And the pass rush wasn't there. There was no elite pass rusher on Florida's defense last year. So now you have to figure out, how can I manufacture pressure to the quarterback without sacrificing my secondary? Well, it's the first natural thing is bring more linebackers, right? Yeah. Insert 5 to combat their 5, and hopefully somebody gets double teamed. And that wasn't working. And you saw, goodness, I don't even want to embarrass me to say what Ole Miss did. Lane Kiffin and company did with Elijah Moore and those guys, and made it a high flying affair in the swamp last year. And then you try and couple that, and you're trying to catch up. And then Marco has his snafu against LSU at the end of the year, which costs us that game and really changes the whole complexion of how we're going into the SEC championship game. Whereas, we were kind of looking good. Okay, win this LSU game and boom, we'll be right back in the playoff hunt for a spot, depending on how well we can play against Alabama and how compelling it is of a game. Yeah. And you lose that game, you go into the Alabama game, you fight tooth and nail. Yeah. But Devontae Smith still has his day. Devontae Smith still gets his numbers. Najee Harris still gets his numbers. And Mac Jones rewrites the quarterback play in an SEC championship game, even though Kyle Trask was also rewriting it as well.
It's like a ghostwriter almost.
No, I mean, it was crazy because you're like, oh man, Kyle Trask has beaten Werfel's record. And then you're like, oh yeah, Mac Jones just beat Kyle Trask's record. Yeah. It's like in succession, like it stood for so long and then it got toppled twice in the same night. And so you say, well, man, that's an indictment on the defense, because the defense did not slow down any of the offensive weapons that was available at Alabama. So now you get to the Oklahoma game, and let's not even talk about that. Just the mass insurrection that went there. But yeah, now you're like, well, what are we going to do? Where do we go from here? There's nothing to really build on because we've got 3 straight losses to end the year. And so where do you hang your hat? What did we do well defensively? And that's where it's going to have to be the biggest question mark. Also is going to have the biggest statement. come this season is, what do we learn from all that youth and inexperience on defense? Did these guys grow, or are they going to regress based off of the way the season ended? So that, you're right. That is the biggest question: is how is Todd Grantham going to respond and rebound from what happened last year, and make sure that this team grows and is competitive, because it's going to rely heavily on the defense until the offense figures itself out.
No, without a doubt, Max. I couldn't agree more. And I do want to ask you about Georgia. You know, we talked a little bit about them earlier. And to me, it's not whether Georgia's going to win the East. And again, we know it's football. Crazier things have happened, especially in the SEC with all the talent around there. But just common sense tells you Georgia's in a really good spot to win the East. The bigger question to me is this, and the question everybody asks, seems like everybody who has anything to do with Georgia asks every year, you know, is this the year that Kirby's able to get over the hump against Alabama? Because if you look at that team, Max, physically, they look different than a whole lot of other teams. You look at Alabama, you see the size, you see the length, you see the athleticism, you see 6'5", 300-pound guys with no fat on them on the offensive line. Then you look at Georgia, and they got a lot of those same guys, if not more, on this year's roster. And you look at JT Daniels, and I think the mixture of JT Daniels and Todd Monken are finally going to get Kirby over the hump that Nick Saban got over and say, listen, we need to open the offense up more, because in order to win these elite games, this isn't 17-10 anymore. You've got to win these games 45-38. You got to win them 41-38. You got to be able to score. And I think Nick Saban was one of, you know, the beauty of Nick Saban is, while he is stuck in his ways, he is not stuck in his ways, because he did evolve offensively, and Kirby's kind of taken that same path. Do you see Georgia being a legitimate threat to knock off Alabama? Because the national championship to me goes to the SEC, and I think you'll agree with me there. Do you see Georgia having the upper hand on Nick Saban and Alabama and finally getting over the hump this year? Not leading at halftime, Max, but leading at the end of the game.
Well, I think that's the question, right? That's been the biggest puzzle, is that no assistant has bested Nick Saban to this point. Everybody gets baptized in the waters of Saban, but nobody ever gets anointed, right?
I like that. I like that. There's the teaser right there. There it is right there, ladies and gentlemen. There it is.
And so I think that's what is going to be the question, because Georgia, you have to remember this, Georgia looked good in 17. Yeah. And Georgia had an opportunity to win a national championship and snatch it from Alabama. And a guy by the name of Tua, you know, comes in and he finds a guy, oh, by the way, won the Heisman, guy by the name of Devontae Smith, makes a miracle catch, and it rewrites that history. And so for Georgia, it's been about, can Georgia really handle their success? Yeah. And that's been the biggest question. There have been really good Georgia teams over the years, teams that should have beat Alabama, teams that should have won the SEC championship that never did. They had the talent, they had the star power. They sent first rounders to the draft year after year, but it's something where they haven't been able to grasp and contain their success and allow it not to get out to the world. Yeah. And for them to really stay focused and measured. And I think, like you said, this roster looks really good. And once again, you answer the tip of the pyramid with a quarterback. Mm-hmm. And JT Daniels showed you that once healthy, he's a lot to deal with.
He's a problem.
And he's going to be problems for the rest of the SEC. But can they be consistent enough mentally to handle the ebbs and flows within a game and not allow it to consume them or worry about perception to jump over it? I think they have physically, talent-wise, put the rosters next to each other. You've got something there. But it's about the mentality. And that's the one thing where Nick Saban always wins. Yeah. That steel trap mentality. Nobody ever gets too full of themselves. It's like watching New England at the college level, right? He is the Darth over. He's the what did I say? The
Dark Overlord.
Dark Overlord. Yeah,
yeah,
Dark
definitely.
Overlord. You know, and he's a Sith Lord runs that Death Star. So how do you manage that? I think Georgia has their best bet of seeing them in the SEC championship game and being able to best them, but it's about mentality. I think if anybody, they're the best bet, and they're the best bet to actually get into the college football playoff as the number 2 team, if not the number 1 team.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And speaking about number one, if number one on your list is to try and get your kid recruited, to get more eyes on them, to get a profile built, to give them a chance to earn a scholarship, if the tape's good enough, if their grades are good enough, you need to download one of the hottest apps being downloaded on the iOS and the Google Play Store right now. It's Dynasty U. Dynasty U. It's like LinkedIn for high school players that are trying to get profiles out there, parents, families. It's great for coaches as well. Gives you a chance to really narrow your focus, help build your culture, and find the players that are right for you. And as a prospect, it opens up way more doors than if you were just trying to do it through the coaches and through yourself. This way, you're not just messaging coaches all the time, blowing up their DMs. I promise you, I've seen it before. I did it for 9 years. If you're able to do this way, it's professional, it's clean, it's easy, and it'll give your kid the best chance to get the most eyes on them. And that's all you can ask. So go to the iOS or the Google Play Store right now and download the Dynasty U app. It's great stuff. It's easy to navigate. It's easy to function. And again, it's about putting who you care about, who you're trying to get recruited. If it's you as an athlete, just you, that's fine. It's easy to do. It's easy to set up. That's Dynasty U. Download it today. Trust me on this one. Download it. Get out of the game. Get ahead of the game early. If you got a kid in middle school, whatever, and you guys are really trying to do that early high school, go download that app. It's great stuff, and it's free. It's a free app. Who doesn't want free stuff, especially when the free thing will put you in a position to get your child or whoever you're trying to help more success. And as a coach, it's so easy. That's the Dynasty U app. Download that today. We're here with NFL and college football analyst from SiriusXM, former first-team All-SEC, two-time Super Bowl champion, SEC champion. If you can win it, he did it. That's Mr. Max Starks talking some SEC football. And we talked about the East. And listen, we can talk about the new hires and Shane Beamer and Josh Heupel and them. I don't think those rosters are ready right now. I think that the three you're really looking at, the four you're really looking at in the East are Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, and Missouri. I'm really interested to see year two under Eli Drinkowitz with Connor Bazelak and some of the weapons he has around him. I love what Eli does offensively from a formation, motion. I think he's really good at finding out what coverage you're in, which has really helped Connor, who's really talented. But I want to look at the East, Matt, or the West, Max, because, Alabama lost a lot. But as you said, as we alluded to, they just reload. That they're going to put guys in there that are NFL players. They replace NFL players with future NFL players. That's the only way you can have this sustained success. It's not lucky. There's no trick. He has the best players. He holds them accountable. They're the most disciplined. You typically win the game. When you look at the rest of the West, Texas A&M, to me, is the biggest sleeping giant in football. You look at the resources. Jimbo is at a place now where he doesn't have to worry about resources. He's obviously making all the money in the world. You're surrounded by talent. The facilities are unbelievable. As an offensive guy, he's a great quarterback, one of the hardest on quarterbacks from a coach standpoint there is, but he gets the most out of them, and he knows the blueprint. He's won a national championship at Florida State. And just like he said a couple weeks ago, he thinks they can beat Saban and them's ass. Now, I probably wouldn't have said that, and you may have meant it joking, but that thing's kind of blown up a little more. Do you see Texas A&M, even though they lost Kellen Mond, and I wasn't the biggest Kellen Mond fan of the world, and I actually think the offense is going to be a little more open this year. Do you see Texas A&M kind of sneaking up in the West saying, listen, if y'all don't watch out, we could really start reeling some stuff off down the road as Jimbo keeps building this thing? Max, they had the number 3 recruiting class in the country last season.
Yeah, no, they did. And then you look at just what's coming back, right? You still got Isaiah Spiller in the backfield. You still got Weidermeyer there at the tight end position. The question is, what are we going to see from Jalen Preston and Chase Lane?
Yeah.
Can they really be the guys that do it? And can Kelzada be your man riding the ship, right? The captain of that offense? Because I think Kellen Mond left it in a place where you're like, okay, this is what the potential could be, and we can take it further. For Jimbo, yeah, you want to have faith. As a coach, yeah, I want to go out. I'm never going to admit defeat to anybody.
Oh,
like
no.
I just talked about Georgia being as good as they are, but if I was a Florida coach, I'd be like, we're going to whip Kirby's behind. You know what I'm saying? So
100%.
That's just the pride you got to have. But I think Jimbo has the mentality. It's whether they can stack up defensively, because that was one of the key things that had to get buttoned up, and it got better as the year went on. But are you in a position to where you can defend against the onslaught that is Alabama, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to give it to you on the ground. They're going to get you through the air. They have fast guys that move everywhere. How do you compete? I like Texas A&M to be the biggest challenge in the West. They're definitely ranked number 2, right behind Alabama in my mind. Because like you said, you look around the rest of the landscape in the West, and yes, Arkansas turned heads. right? Sam Pittman, year one, Felipe Franks playing out of body for a year, really gave them a leg up in getting back on track. But Texas A&M has to take a big leap this year. I think they have it. It's just going to be whether Calzada can handle that offense and can get the ball in the playmakers' hands consistently. Because we saw Kellen Mond struggle for 2 years, right? Once Jimbo came, sophomore, junior year, and had a little bit of issues, but everything else was okay. Once he got to his senior year, he settled down. That Florida game was kind of that catalyst for him that really put them in condition and had them playing great ball. The question is, Kellen Mond's gone. Does Calzada make you forget about Kellen Mond? That's going to be the question.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, they got Haynes King as well. And we all know how Jimbo is, is Jimbo going to go with the guy that may be a dual threat who may not be as an elite a passer? Or does he go with the kind of the older guy, the more pro style, a guy that kind of understands it, knows the coaching a little bit more with how he is? It's going to be so interesting to watch. And I agree with you 100%. And watching Texas A&M last year on the offensive line was just fun. If you like grinding football, watching what those guys did as a unit on the offensive line last year, they just squeezed people to death at the end of the games. I thought it really kind of protected Mond a little bit as well. And I think them and LSU, I actually have them and LSU finishing with identical SEC records. I've got LSU winning the last SEC game of the year. They have A&M at home. Because, man, I feel like LSU is in the best position when they're an outsider. I've said that a million times on this show. We all know what they lost going into last year with the opt-outs in the draft, with all the talent off that roster, and then no Jamar Chase. And coming back this year, I just feel like they have a chip on their shoulder. I really like the hire they made with Jake Peetz, what he's going to do for the RPO game, trying to get back that Joe Brady flavor. I'm not going to say it's Joe Brady's offense because it's not. It's not Joe Brady there, and I think trying to compare those things without Joe Burrow isn't fair. But do you see LSU with all the talent they have? Because we know Ed Orgeron recruited really well. I think he actually interviewed the assistants this time so that, he has a better idea of how it's going. But do you think LSU kind of bounces back a little bit this year and rights the ship and gets it going? Because, man, watching them last year, especially on defense, I don't know about you, Max, but that was just weird to see how bad they were.
It was. I mean, that's DBU, right?
100%.
You're not supposed to see defensive backs getting burned, or Mike Leach with his 12-play playbook, being able to do whatever he
get out of man, dog,
at will. Stop it. You knew what the problem was. Stop doing that. Stop being prideful. And I think that's what the biggest thing is. I think they've learned, like you said, they've went and they've gotten the right assistants. And, I'm really excited to see whether it's Max Johnson or TJ Finley.
Yeah.
At quarterback. I think you now are in a position where you have it seemingly put together to where you have two guys you really trust that have been in the system now. They feel comfortable with the environment. The offensive guys are available. And I think they're going to be a much improved team. I don't think they're ready to combat Alabama, but I think they're competitive for Auburn, Arkansas. They're competitive for the Mississippi schools. And I think, like you said, they can give Texas A&M a run for their money. So it's going to be interesting. And if they gain confidence, you might get that Florida victory like you did last year, right?
Yeah.
You might surprise a lot of people. I don't think it's lightning in a bottle as 2 years ago, but I think they're a very solid team. And I think they're a team that when you talk about the upper echelon of the SEC and you're ranking East and West combined, they should be in your top half.
Yeah, and you got TJ Finley on the brain because he's in the portal. I know you meant Miles Brennan. I did the same thing early. No, I know he's in the portal. It's on the brain. It's all everybody's talking about. It's funny. That's why I let you go. I literally did the same thing earlier on a radio interview. That's funny because that's all we've talked about for the past couple of days. But no, I agree with you. And again, I think, because and I've said it multiple times. There's nothing that motivates an 18 to 22-year-old more than being embarrassed in front of your family and friends. And everywhere plastered in that weight room is going to be scores from last year and really kind of that icky feeling that you have that you want to get back. And Ed Orgeron's a great motivator. You can think what you want about him, but he is a really good motivator. I think that's why he's able to get so many recruits. He gets guys really gassed up and gets them to play typically. But, Max, as we're winding down here, I do got to ask you for our Auburn audience, your thoughts on the Brian Harsin hire. I like it. I think it was out of the box for Auburn. They went against the good old boy network. I've said that multiple times. I mean, you bring in Mike Bobo, a veteran guy that knows the lay of the land in recruiting. You're going to have good quarterback play. You're going to go through progressions. You're going to hit the check down. He brings Will Friend as his offensive line coach, a guy he's very familiar with. They've had a lot of success in tandem, and you know how important that OC and O-line coach relationship is. It's about as important as anyone out out there. And then he hires Derek Mason as the defensive coordinator, a guy that, I can sit here and just say his name and the accolades start rolling in. I know he struggled at Vanderbilt, but hey, who hasn't other than James Franklin, who's got to be a witch. I don't know how he did that, but it's going to be interesting to see Clark Lee. But, Max, when you look at Auburn, you look at Brian Harsin, what do you think about the hire? And what do you think year one? Because while the roster's not where it needs to be, he has some pretty good talent coming back, including Tank Bigsby, an experienced quarterback in Bo Nix, that if he'll stay in the pocket, if the offensive lineman will give him a pocket and then he'll stay in it, they can have a chance to do some things.
Yeah, no, I like the Brian Harsin hire. As a guy who has called Mountain West over the last couple of years.
Yeah. Very familiar.
I'm very familiar with him. And he's a complete outsider, right? He's a guy that has no connection to the Southeast. He doesn't know what the good old boy network looks like. He hasn't delved into what Southeastern Conference football is. So he comes in kind of with an open mind, and he brings a lot of things that I think is creativity from the Mountain West into the SEC. So I think if you can reel Bo Nix in, if you can really get him to focus in, and I think that's going to be Bobo's job, and Bobo has done it great at every stop he's done. He's learned how to figure out work with what he's got. They could be a team that can be a problem and that pest in the West and in SEC play, because they're a team that could sneak up on you. Anytime you got a guy by the name of Tank in the backfield,
I know, right?
Have success.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's one of the bright spots I looked at was Tank Bigsby was the one reassuring force week in and week out outside of the injury for that Auburn team, because Bo Nix just looked rattled. Yeah. And, there was not enough there to really make him feel good. Chad Morris didn't make him feel comfortable. And I'm really excited to see Mike Bobo come in, have time to work with him, had the spring, and you have now summer workouts to really delve into what does he do well. And that offensive line is going to have to grow up. I mean, you have a crew there. And like you said, when you get a good O-line coach, and I know the assistant O-line coach, he was one of my teammates back in Pittsburgh. Yeah. Kendall Simmons working in that room with them as the assistant / quality control. You know how they move.
Yeah, definitely.
His office is in the O-line room. That's all we need to know.
Take the guards.
Yeah, exactly. All right, centers and guards, you go over that way.
It's 100% right. And then Brad Bedell, who they say is a tight ends coach, who's really another offensive line coach. Because again, you can kind of mix and match that a little bit with personnel, which is smart. Hell, you know how it goes.
Yeah. So I think Auburn could be that team. I think they're not there yet, but I think Brian Harsin is going to institute some things. Do I think it's going to be to the level of Statue of Liberty, Fiesta Bowl? Not exactly, but he's going to figure out the best way to really get those guys going. Because, I mean, you're looking at it, you have one senior and you have a grad transfer and Newton really that you know about. So how are those young guys going to be? They don't really have, the experience on their side. So they're still new books. They're waiting to be written in. And so I look at that and I say, there's a possibility they can do some things that'll be creative and surprising, because one thing I know about boys that we're watching them, they're going to sling the ball around the field.
Yeah.
And if you're getting Bo Nix to run any type of Boise style-esque influences within Mike Bobo's system, this is the perfect way to get it instituted. And I think Bo Nix would flourish in that. When he's on the move, when he's not having to stay steady in the pocket, and you give him some predetermined stuff to show off his athleticism, that's when he shines. When you have him taking 5 and 7 step drops directly back vertical in the pocket, that's when you get issues. That's when the vision gets shaky. And that's when you don't get to dictate. You have to have everything dictated to you from the defensive side of the ball. So I think if you do that, pair that with a ground game and Tanks Bigsby, Auburn now looks like a team that can at least frustrate the other teams. They might not get all the victories, but I think the games will be a lot closer and more competitive going into the fourth quarter.
Man, Max, I think you encapsulated that perfectly, man. And my last question for you, and it's one I'm going to start asking, probably going to do a prove me wrong on it, and I'm very interested to see the response. And again, it's kind of tough because, the question is, does the Alabama run or this Alabama dynasty end or at least slow down a lot once Nick Saban leaves? Because, again, you can have all the resources in the world and stuff like this, But Nick Saban is one of a kind. That there's not another Nick Saban walking around out there. So you think it would take a little bit of a hit. But do you see once the Nick, because it's got to end eventually, right? But if anybody could live forever or take the limitless pill that lives forever, it's probably Nick Saban. He can probably get it. But when he retires, do you think Alabama won't fall back to where they were, but kind of it become a little more balanced and a little more parity in the West, like you think it would be over time? In my opinion, I think so.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the hosts out here in the local show that I do posed the question, what's the one certainty you have in sports? And I remember I wrote it out to him, sent it on my tweet. I was like, Alabama being ranked top 3 in the country as long as Nick Saban's there, year in, year out. It's the only certainty. I think it does slow down because, once again, even if you hire a guy within that staff that's been with Nick Saban, even though there's not that many originals left because they all get poached, right? When you're that good, you get poached. It's just going to be different. It's different when the head man's there. I mean, just think about the scare when he had the COVID positive test and we didn't know if he was going to be on the sidelines.
Yeah, that's a
the
big
stir and the frenzy that happened. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Alabama fans were falling off of Paul Feinbaum.
Are we going to forget how to win?
Left and right. Yeah, exactly. Do we know what the football looks like now?
Yes, please.
It was crazy, but I think there will be a step back. There always has to be a pullback because, right, the universe has to correct itself.
Yeah.
When it's been so shifted in one direction, you've got to find the counterbalance. And I think that happens when Nick Saban retires, unless you're going and getting a guy by the name of Bill Belichick, who's the only other carbon copy clone I've ever seen. So that's where you're at. And I think it does open it up for everybody else because, like we said, to this point, no assistant has bested him.
No.
Not one.
No.
Not one. And you might as well call it the Saban Eastern Conference, right? For how many head coaches he's installed from his staffs
it's nuts.
Around the SEC. And none of them can beat him. None of them can best him. They only hope to keep pace with him. And that's what my biggest challenge is that it won't happen until Saban decides to retire. Or he just loses it one day and goes, all Bobby Knight on the team. That's the only way you get that type of deal. But he is the most successful, most winningest coach. And the next guy can't live up to that. And you're going to see this constant turnover like Mac Brown in Texas, right? They're still trying to find the next Mac Brown and they can't find him. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. It's going to have to take a fresh new approach and you have to change your dynamics, but it's going to shift the title back over to the East and to some of those teams. I think the wealth will then start to spread between your Kirby Smarts as long as he's at Georgia, if Saban's not present. If you see what Mark Stoops can do, if he can still keep Kentucky where they're at and give them some more prominence, because I think they're your best push behind Georgia and Florida, then Dan Mullen. Can he get another quarterback? That's going to be the next question. That doesn't go to Clemson, that doesn't go to Alabama, that doesn't go to Ohio State. Can you actually retain a top quarterback and get him in there so that you can become one of those top 4 teams like Oklahoma?
Yeah, no, and it's going to be really interesting to follow. And it's funny when I think about the assistants, the old Saban assistants that are now head coaches coaching against them in game. I just think back to the scene of The Waterboy when Coach Klein's on the sidelines and he looks over to the other and he sees Red Bayou and all of a sudden or sees another coach and then Red Bayou's face pops up and says, "You're fired." And he just goes into a shell and goes and hides. It's almost like that same dynamic, like that middle thing, like somebody stole their green playbook or something. But Max, man, this has been great stuff, brother. We got to do this again. I got to get you on more, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media? And you're on SiriusXM as well, breaking down college football, NFL football, man. Go ahead and drop the plug.
All right, sounds good. Well, you can catch me on Twitter at MaxStark78 and IG MStark78. I'm on SiriusXM SEC Radio, channel 374. Towards the end of the week, we're on hiatus right now because it's summertime and kids are off school, so we're off school as well.
There you go.
But during the season, Thursdays and Fridays, I'm there. You can find me on ESPNU throughout Mad Dog Sports Radio. So anywhere from channel in the 80s all the way to 374, and I do NFL radio as well. So you can catch me there. I'm on Stadium on Saturdays calling games, usually for Conference USA or Mountain West. I'll be their game of the week analyst. And freelancing around the rest of this beautiful web and television space.
Yeah, well, they don't put bad analysts on Game of the Weeks. I can promise you that. And there's a reason you're there. But Max, I really appreciate it, buddy. Stay safe out there. I appreciate everybody joining us as well. Make sure you head over to jboyshow.com, grab some merch, subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to the podcast. Got some more great stuff coming. Make sure you tell your friends. We're going to blow this thing up as big as we possibly can as we steamroll toward the SEC football season. It's been another edition of the Jboy Show, and Jboy's going. Gone.
The Jboy Show is produced by David Cohn, Technical Director Dave Hammock, Creative Director David Culbertson, Audio Engineer Feyzan Shareef, Production Assistants Blaine Crain and Kyle Orr, Executive Producers Jake Crain, Vince Thompson, Steve Chamberlain, and David Cohn. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, thejboyshow.com, for updates regarding our newest apparel and merch designs. Win the water cooler with the Jboy Show.